Have you ever been told that you are simply too much?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a loaded phrase.
Right. I mean, you probably know the exact feeling. You walk into a room, you share an idea you were just super passionate about, or you express a really deep emotion, and you can, like, just see it register in the eyes of the people around you.
Oh, absolutely. You see that slight physical step back they take?
Exactly. It's that silent collective verdict that you are somehow overflowing whatever little container they had built for you in their minds.
And it is a profoundly isolating experience,
Yeah.
because the underlying message there is that your baseline state of existence is somehow, well, it's an error.
Like a glitch or something.
Right, like it's an uncomfortable excess. When society labels you as too much,
Mm.
it almost inevitably makes you feel like you need to apologize for taking up space.
Yeah.
Or worse, that you need to fundamentally shrink yourself just to make others comfortable.
And that tension right there, that friction between the vastness of who we actually are inside and how the outside world tries to categorize us, that is the focus of our deep dive today.
And it's such a fascinating angle we have for it.
It really is. But we aren't coming at this from, a standard psychology or self-help perspective. We are diving into a totally different framework today. We are looking at this brilliant 7-stanza lyric poem called Drenched Whale.
Which is just an incredible piece of writing.
Oh, stunning. And we're pairing it with a really detailed critical essay that breaks down its themes titled Radical Immanence and the Architecture of Depth. Our goal for you, the listener, as we work through these sources today, is to explore a total paradigm shift.
Yeah, total reimagining of things.
Exactly. We want to see what it actually looks like to completely dissolve the boundary between yourself and the world. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, we should probably clarify early on that while the poem centers on a whale, the critical text makes it super clear this isn't a literal marine biology lesson.
Right. No science quizzes today.
No, exactly. The whale operates as what the essay calls an embodied argument. She represents a very specific philosophical state of being known as radical immanence.
Radical immanence. Which sounds intense, but it basically just means
It's essentially the condition of being completely, unapologetically saturated by your own reality. It is like the direct opposite of trying to escape your circumstances.
and that concept of being saturated, it becomes literal right away in the text. The sources highlight this striking opening image where the poem completely flips our understanding of biological necessity. The poem states that the whale surfaces, but not to breathe.
Right, which totally subverts the one fundamental fact we all tend to know about whales, right?
They're mammals.
Exactly, they are mammals. They absolutely require oxygen from the surface to survive. So as readers, we expect a narrative of biological lack.
Yeah.
We expect that she goes to the surface because she is running out of something she desperately needs.
Right, but the text tells us she doesn't rise out of desperation at all. She surfaces because the depth has become, quote, indistinguishable from herself.
It's such a powerful line.
It really is. So she's not gasping for air. She is rising because of what the critical essay terms an ontological overflow.
Yeah. And just to define that quickly, ontology is the philosophical study of being,
Right.
of existence itself.
Right.
So an ontological overflow means she is so incredibly full of the ocean, so completely saturated by her own existence, that she simply spills over into the air. Her being just, it can no longer be contained entirely beneath the waves.
The analogy I couldn't shake while reading this analysis was a sponge left in a bucket of water.
Oh, that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, because if you look at that completely waterlogged sponge, it hasn't failed. It isn't drowning. It has simply fulfilled its exact physical nature to the absolute maximum point,
Right. It's doing exactly what a sponge is meant to do.
Exactly. It has absorbed so much that you literally cannot tell where the sponge ends and the water begins. But usually if we encounter a saturated sponge, what do? We wring it out.
Because we want it to be useful again. We want it dry.
Right. We hate that saturation.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the essay breaks down that exact human tendency to categorize things. Because the poem tells us that this whale carries whole oceans inside her body, but it explicitly states she carries them not as burden, not as gift, but as the simple fact of what she is.
And that refusal to categorize is just so rare. I mean, usually if we encounter someone who is incredibly sensitive or someone who carries a massive emotional capacity,
Someone with an ocean inside them.
yeah, exactly. If we meet someone like that, we rush to put a narrative frame around it. We either pathologize it as a tragedy, like, oh, this heavy burden that weighs them down, or we swing completely to the opposite end and romanticize it as a superpower, a unique gift.
We demand a storyline. We want it to be a blessing or a curse because those are manageable narratives for us.
Right, they fit into our little boxes.
Exactly. But the poem completely rejects those sentimental frameworks. By refusing to call the depth a burden or a gift, the text insists on pure isness.
Pure isness. I love that term.
It is a state of being that is prior to any interpretation or judgment. She just is.
But, existing in that state of pure isness inherently blurs the lines of identity.
Oh, for sure.
Because if we follow the logic of the saturated sponge or the whale where the depth is indistinguishable from herself, we
Yeah.
run into this psychological wall. The essay points out a moment where the poem states, "The water doesn't know it is inside her. She doesn't know she is the water."
Which is a very challenging concept.
It is. Now, I have to admit, when I read that line, my immediate instinct was to push back.
Really? What triggered the pushback for you there?
It was the phrase "doesn't know." I mean, we typically view awareness as the ultimate hallmark of a highly evolved creature, right?
Right, consciousness is everything.
Yeah. To know your environment, to be fully aware of your surroundings, that is how you survive and thrive. So if the poem says she doesn't know she is the water, it just sounds like ignorance.
I can see how it reads that way.
Wait, but isn't that just a form of ignorance? If she doesn't know she's water, isn't she just unaware of her reality? It feels like a regression, not some enlightened state.
It is entirely logical to interpret it that way because, Western thought heavily equates knowing with mastery. To know something is to conquer it intellectually.
Exactly.
But the essay argues that in the context of radical immanence, this lack of knowing is not a failure of intelligence at all. Rather, it illustrates the mechanical structure of deep belonging.
The mechanics of it. How does not knowing equate to belonging?
It comes down to the concept of mutual constitution.
Okay.
The whale and the water make each other up. When an entity and its environment are perfectly integrated like that, the physical and psychological boundaries required for observation just disappear entirely.
I'm just trying to picture that.
Think about it mechanically. In order for you to point at a tree and say, "I know that is a tree," there has to be physical and mental distance between you and the tree. You have to be separate from it.
Oh, I see. So because the whale is entirely saturated, there is no distance?
Right.
There is nowhere for her to stand outside of the ocean to observe it. So conscious observational knowing is actually impossible.
Precisely. Neither the water nor the whale holds the knowing, because the boundary required to observe the other thing simply doesn't exist anymore.
That's wild to think about.
The essay actually connects this to a line where the poem describes this state as the oldest confusion. The text says, "This is the oldest confusion, to be so thoroughly a thing that the thing forgets it was ever named."
Wow. Which moves us completely out of marine biology and straight into human psychology. That oldest confusion is really just the dissolution of the ego.
It is the ultimate letting go of the ego. The source text describes this as a return to the pre-linguistic, pre-categorical self.
Pre-linguistic, before language.
Exactly. Before human beings developed language, before anyone pointed at you and assigned you a category or a name, you simply existed. You didn't need to define yourself to prove your existence.
Right.
The whale is operating in that vast, unnamed space.
It sounds incredibly peaceful, honestly. Just existing as a pure state of being without having to constantly, define your boundaries for the rest of the world.
It is deeply peaceful. But of course, the illusion of total peace eventually breaks.
Because you can't live in a vacuum. Eventually, that boundaryless state is going to collide with the rigid structures of society.
And that collision is inevitable. The outside world is completely obsessed with boundaries.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The essay marks this exact turning point in the text. The social world finally enters the poem, and their very first reaction upon seeing this perfectly integrated creature is to pathologize her.
They immediately label her.
They do. The poem reads, they call her drenched. They mean too much.
The word drenched is such a loaded, highly specific choice here. It strongly implies a mistake.
Like you did something wrong.
Right. If you were drenched, it means you stepped out into a storm without an umbrella. It implies an uncomfortable excess that needs to be cleaned up or dried off immediately.
It is the ultimate cultural verdict. The essay hits the nail on the head when it argues that too much is the label society applies to any entity that exceeds the container prepared for it.
Which happens constantly.
And for you, listening right now, this is probably where the philosophy becomes deeply personal. Because when your capacity to feel or your porosity to the world around you makes others uncomfortable, their reaction is to label you as the problem.
Yes, it's never their lack of understanding, it's your excess.
Exactly. You aren't vast, you are just too much.
The critical text refers to this dynamic as misreading as a structural condition, which is an important distinction. The external observers aren't necessarily acting out of pure malice.
They aren't just trying to be mean.
Right, they are acting out of structural limitation. They literally lack the vocabulary to understand a being that is so vastly integrated with its depth. They only have small, rigid words for small, rigid containers. So drenched is the best they can do.
But what I found most compelling is the whale's response to this misreading. Because honestly, if someone mischaracterizes me or tells me I am too much, my immediate reflex is to manage their perception.
Oh, me too. I want to defend myself.
Right. I want to argue. I want to explain exactly why I care so deeply. Or on my worst days, I try to shrink myself to make them more comfortable. But the whale doesn't fight the label and she doesn't shrink.
Not at all.
Yeah.
She performs this quiet psychological alchemy. The text says she retranslates their judgment.
Right. The poem says, when they say too much, she hears. I am continuous with everything that has ever moved.
It gives me chills.
She completely metabolizes their criticism.
Think about the mechanics of what she is doing there. She takes their small, pathologizing word, and instead of letting it define her, she passes it through the filter of her own self-knowing.
She knows who she is.
She knows she isn't an accident. She knows she's continuous with the tides, with the currents, with the deep history of the ocean. She allows their misunderstanding to just exist in the air, but she completely neutralizes its power over her.
The essay also highlights a very specific grammatical choice that reinforces this power. It points out that the poem deliberately and repeatedly uses the feminine pronoun she.
Yeah.
And the author of the essay argues this isn't just a literal biological marker for the animal.
No, it is a deliberate location within a long cultural tradition. Historically, the feminine has always been associated with water, with emotion, with intuition, and with porosity.
Right.
And historically, the rigid, categorizing structures of society have often dismissed those very qualities as messy, irrational, or, as you said, too much.
But the poem reclaims that association. It doesn't deny the connection between the feminine and the oceanic. It reframes it as a source of immense power.
A total reclamation.
The essay summarizes this beautifully, stating that in this poem, she is not fragile, she is oceanic. I mean, sensitivity and porosity are not weaknesses. They are a vastness that the surface world simply cannot comprehend.
Which logically leads us to how she resolves the encounter, right?
Yeah.
Having metabolized their judgment, having recognized their total inability to understand her, how does she physically respond?
She simply goes back under. The text literally says she goes back under, and the critical analysis emphasizes how totally devoid of drama this movement is.
Yes. So quiet.
There is no splash of anger, no grand final statement to her critics. She just sinks.
You really have to realize, right, that her going under isn't like a retreat.
No.
The poem isn't framing this as a defeat where she is chased away by society. The essay describes it as a homecoming. She's decisively returning to the element she naturally inhabits.
Because the surface is the realm of judgment.
Exactly. The surface is the realm of judgment and small words. The deep is the realm of truth.
And the way the poem structures this return brings us to a concept in the essay that I genuinely needed to read a few times to fully grasp the idea of a syntactic image.
Yes.
The final line of the poem is, the surface closes like a sentence that needed no period.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, looking at the final stanza, it is a brilliant melding of form and content. Syntax, of course, is the arrangement of words to create well-formed sentences.
Right, grammar.
The essay argues that the poem uses the physical environment, the ocean surface, as a manifestation of language.
So if the ocean surface is the written line, how does her sinking act as grammar?
Think of a period at the end of a sentence. A period is a hard boundary. It is a mandated stop that tells the reader, this thought is now contained.
Like a wall.
Exactly. But the whale doesn't need a period because her existence is already inherently whole. Her submersion back into the water is grammatically complete thought in itself.
Oh, wow.
The water closing over her isn't an abrupt end or a cessation of her being, it is pure coherence. She doesn't need terminal punctuation to validate her completeness.
That makes so much sense. She doesn't need the external validation of a boundary to prove she exists. And the essay points out that this resistance to rigid boundaries is built into the literal architecture of the poem on the page.
Yes, the structural analysis is just fascinating. The poem utilizes no rhyming scheme and no fixed meter. The lines are generally short and weighted to the left margin, but occasionally they spill far outward to the right.
Like water sloshing over.
Exactly. The essay argues this visual sprawling mimics the ontological overflow we discussed at the beginning. The poem itself is literally spilling over its own margins.
But the most compelling structural observation for me was about the blank space. The essay notes that the white space between the stanzas isn't just empty formatting or a place for the reader to take a breath.
No, it's doing so much more work than that.
The white space actually functions as the water itself. The essay states that these pauses aren't empty, they are where the depth lives.
We have a deep cultural fear of blank space, both on the page and in conversation. We feel a constant need to fill silence with words, just as we feel a need to fill our environments with boundaries and labels.
We hate awkward silences.
We do, but the poem elevates the silence. It suggests that the depth doesn't need to announce itself constantly. It speaks for itself in the quiet, unmarked spaces.
Taking all of this into account, the refusal to be categorized, the dissolution of the ego, the metabolizing of judgment, and finding coherence in the depth. So what does this all mean, really? What is the ultimate philosophical takeaway from these sources?
The essay synthesizes all of these elements to argue for a radical reorientation of how we define enlightenment and truth. In almost every aspect of Western culture, we are conditioned to value transcendence.
The idea of rising above.
Exactly. We use the language of ascension for absolutely everything positive. We climb the corporate ladder, we take the high road, we get over our problems, we rise above the fray.
Always moving up.
Right. We are taught that to find truth or peace, we must transcend the messy, heavy realities of the world and sort of float above them.
But Drenched Whale argues the exact opposite. It champions immanence over transcendence.
The whale does not find truth by escaping into the air. She finds it by descending.
Going down.
The critical breakdown firmly aligns ultimate truth with depth, not height. It proposes that real enlightenment isn't about escaping your reality or building a fortress of boundaries to protect yourself. It is about fully, entirely inhabiting your reality.
Just being where you are.
Exactly. It is about allowing yourself to be entirely drenched by the truth of your own existence, regardless of whether the outside world understands it.
It is about letting the depth become indistinguishable from yourself. Thinking about you, the listener, we started this deep dive by asking if you've ever felt the sting of being labeled too much for the world around you.
A feeling we all know too well.
Yeah. And we've seen how this poem and its analysis offer a profoundly different lens for that experience, shifting it from a burden to a state of radical immanence. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a slightly different angle to consider, one that builds on this idea of the white space and the depth.
I think the contrast between the surface world of judgment and the silent depth of the whale is super striking, especially when applied to how we live today.
Exactly. Think about the modern digital world we all inhabit right now. Social media, constant connectivity, the algorithm. It is an ecosystem that demands constant surface-level performance.
It never stops.
We are required to constantly define our boundaries, post our opinions, state our identities, and fill every single ounce of digital white space with the definitive period. It is an environment built entirely on the fear of being silent, and it practically guarantees that your complexities will be misread and categorized by small words.
Because the algorithm only understands small words.
Exactly. So here is the final provocative question to mull over on your own. In a culture that structurally forces you to live on the surface and constantly declare your boundaries, what does it actually look like to cultivate digital or social depth?
That's a great question.
What would happen if, instead of fighting to explain your vastness to an algorithm or a society that only understands the shallows, you allowed yourself the luxury of the white space? What if you let your complexities remain unnamed, ending your day not with a desperate attempt to be perfectly understood, but by quietly sinking into the peace of your own profound, unapologetic depth?